Hello, this is John Milburn for PROP13001 Property Development. This is week 12, the final week for this unit. And tonight the topic relates to global trends. Global trends means that we are considering issues of a macro level, but those issues that affect potentially many people will dramatically affect a property developer in some ways if they're not careful to consider the consequences of the emerging changes that may be made. So in the notes for this week, you'll see that the dramatic area of change potentially relates to climate change. And in that regard, I urge you to read the article by Associate Professor Garrick Small of Central Queensland University, who identifies the economic effects of on property development and property prices through climate change and rising sea levels. Clearly, those developers who are looking to develop in an area that is subject to potential rising sea levels need to consider this aspect very carefully. Bear in mind, of course, that it's not just the direct effect of rising sea levels on a property development that may be of concern. It may be the thought or the fear or the expectation, at worst case scenario, of damage to property as a result of climate change. So in other words, even before there is any physical effects which are available, the effect on a property development may be dramatic. So in his article, Professor Small considers a spectrum of coastal property types and considers that within the context of a case study of Australian urban waterfront property. The focus of his paper is on Coogee, an upmarket suburb of Sydney, seaside, and the analysis reveals that while sea level changes have the potential to erode valuable property rights and therefore prices, there is an issue that is something that must be conceptualised and considered across a wide range of aspects. So it's not just, as I mentioned, the physical outcomes over the next century or so that need to be considered, but rather the steady decline potentially in capital gain as a result of expectations coming to the fore in terms of climate change. In his report, Professor Small goes on to identify in some dollar terms the issues relating to prices in Sydney. Now, Coogee, at the time of writing the report, had a median property price around about $1.5 million compared to Sydney's average house price at that time of $605,000. Now, this was in 2013. And the indication in the report was that if sea level hazards affect properties in Coogee, and if there was a fall of, say, 50% of the price due to that, then people are looking at very substantial losses. And more importantly, that's going to affect potential property developments and those developments that are underway. So property developers need to develop an appropriate strategy, consider international property trends, consider global trends, and not just in relation to ecological issues, but a wider range of issues. Now, in your notes, you'll see that we've discussed generally the effect of globalisation, how it can affect property developments, and how it can impact on potential markets. So globalisation has a number of impacts. They are industrial, financial, economic, political, informational, cultural, ecological, social, and technical and legal. Have a look at Reed and Sims property development at 12.1.1 in that regard. Many organisation models that deal with property development consider the workforce and consider the property development from the perspective of those people that would use the development. And a large part of that relates to not only the amenity of the living area, but also access to employment. So when considering developing markets, property developers need to consider infrastructure, need to consider the way in which the workforce is going to be sourced and operate in the years to come. So there may be, in time, through technology, less relocation of number of workers, which may have an impact on an initial property development, which was otherwise catering for the movement of workers towards a particular area. Sometimes this requires consideration of transnational business and cross-border developments. Have a look at the material relating to PricewaterhouseCoopers, who have provided some information referred to in your text at 12.2, and provide some statements about safe cities, gateway centres, and investment opportunities generally. Also, you need to consider cultural barriers and globalisation in terms of property development. What that means is looking at developing some form of global strategy, transnational strategy, and in that regard, have a look at the global integration and local responsiveness chart or graph, which is reproduced in your notes. It's a little aged, it's from 1993. But what it does is cross-reference pressure for global efficiencies against pressure for local responsiveness and flexibility. And within that context, you'll see that the authors have developed some commentary in relation to international strategy, transnational strategy, home replication, and multi-domestic strategies. I've already mentioned climate change, which is an important aspect of developing your strategy. Now, in the notes, we go on to talk about developing an international strategy. Have a look at 12.5, and you'll see that within the context of property development, the first step is to develop a mission statement, which is fairly standard across any form of enterprise. Step 2, undertake environmental scanning, and importantly, and quite commonly, a SWOT analysis, so that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And within that context, it's important to consider environmental issues. Step 3 is to set strategic goals. Step 4 is to develop strategic tactical goals or plans. And then finally, step 5 is to develop a control framework, which is setting the organisational and managerial processes to keep a property developer moving towards its strategic goals. So look at figure 12.2 in your notes, which provides a flowchart developing the steps in international strategy. All right, so tonight's topic, which deals with emerging markets, is really looking at the international effects of globalisation, looking at the effects of climate change, and trying to cross-reference that with the way in which property developers undertake their business. It may be that in a very simple way, emerging markets means looking at places where a property developer may establish new markets. Now, that may be looking from an Australian perspective, looking to Asia to attract buyers in relation to property off the plan. Now, there's nothing new about that. It's been happening for some time. But within that context, property developers would need to have a good understanding of rules in relation to foreign investment and the current process and approval process and strategies developed in relation to the foreign investment approvals. So those things need to be considered by a property developer within the context of developing property in the right location, free from or minimal risk associated with climate change, rising sea levels, and in a way that will attract buyers through developing these emerging markets. All right, well, that completes this unit. Thank you very much for your attendance. We look forward to seeing you in the tutorial sessions. And in relation to the examination, we will talk about that in the tutorial sessions. If you have any questions, as usual, please ask through UCrew. It's been a pleasure to be your unit coordinator. All the best.